Hello, welcome to episode 527 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Paridon, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my co-host, historian and author, John Parshall. Hey, you know what? It wouldn't be an intro if I didn't screw it up, John.
That's right. How are you doing today? I'm great, grinding on the book. It's all good on my end.
Yeah.
So, and as you can see, we have a third guest with us today, yet another John, our buddy
Mhm.
John McManus, who was not too long ago sitting in my living room before he jet set it off to Britain to go to the We Have Ways Fest. You have a good time there?
I had a blast there. It was amazing. We had about, I mean, I don't even know how many thousand people there. Crazy stuff, big tents, lots of talks, lots of panels, a game show that I didn't humiliate myself in too much. I mean, only somewhat. And
Right?
I consider that a victory, of course, but yeah, it was a blast.
Yeah. James Scott was out there too. Yeah.
Yep. Got to hang out a lot with James Scott. James and I actually did a panel with Saul David about the end of the
Uh,
war in Asia Pacific, and so that was a really interesting discussion. Talked
yeah, I
a lot
like
about
Saul.
yeah, about the firebombing raids and Operation Downfall, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's a really neat festival because people are just really into it. They
Yeah.
know their stuff, and I've literally never met a jerk there. The
Cool.
nicest people. It makes it a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt. And you are deep in the weeds in your forthcoming book on Ridgeway, right?
I am. I've written maybe about two-thirds of it,
Yeah.
but there's still a heck of a lot to go. Ridgway's amazing. He's just like his hands are in everything in the 20th century.
Yeah.
So obviously he's famous for the airborne dimension in World War II, with good reason. But actually, his shining moment is probably in Korea when he's the Eighth Army commander and helps author a pretty major turnaround. Then he
Right.
takes over for MacArthur after MacArthur gets fired. He takes over for Ike when Ike decides to run for president. And Ike had been like basically the NATO commander. And then he becomes Army Chief of Staff. Before the war, he's the Army's leading Latin American specialist. So there's all these interesting little twists and turns. And of course, George Marshall is one of his mentors. So you get to know Ridgway, you can get into the Marshall world a little bit too.
Right.
And they
Right.
have a long association. And then obviously Ridgway had this really kind of interesting retirement. He lived age 98. So he was
Wow.
pretty influential, I think it's fair to say, on policy in the 60s and 70s in the Cold War era.
Yeah, that's cool.
Very
When do you
cool.
think when's supposed to be coming out?
I wish I knew. You could relate to this,
Says
John.
one jerk author to another jerk author. That's right. When's your
I
book gonna
mean,
be out?
get
Yeah.
that thing out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's so I'm supposed to finish it around this time next year and turn it in. I hope that happens.
Yeah.
I'm making tremendous headway, but as you know as well as anybody, it takes a while.
Yeah, it does. And I should just say, for the sake of argument, for those who are interested in what's going on in my stupid book project, I am in the middle of laying that thing out. It is tracking for 1,200 pages,
Is that all?
right?
It's like a little brief, you know? It's
So yeah, it's getting there.
novella.
But it's still on track for coming out May of next year. So, John, the other thing I wanted to ask you, you are starting up a new podcast, are
Yes.
you not? Give us the
I
deets.
Yeah, I am. It's called World War II Live, and I'm co-hosting with Kevin Hemel, who you guys know, who is,
Hmm.
I think, in my opinion, the world's leading patent expert. Now that,
Okay.
Carlo's gone and Martin
Yeah.
Blumenson. Blumenson was actually Kevin's mentor. So Kevin and I have done, touring together and all that, and we've always kind of wanted to host a pod together or do something like that. So it's called
Yeah.
World War II Live, and obviously our subjects will lend toward U.S. and World War II, which is the expertise that he and I have. But we'll take on a lot of topics, and then in any episode we'll be dealing with a topic, and then we'll have what was called Stump the Chumps segment, which people can send us questions. We don't
Right.
pretend to know everything, hence the name, and we take the questions cold. And I think there's some level of entertainment in that and seeing us
Yes.
squirm. Um,
Absolutely. We love that stuff. That's just,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the way to do it.
yeah, it's
So,
fun. So if you want to do that, send it to us at World War II Live at gmail.com. worldwar2live@gmail.com. So it's it's video cast just like this. We're on YouTube and also the audio platforms too.
Cool.
It's WW the number 2, right, John?
It's World War, yes, the numeral 2, like the Arabic numeral 2, World War
Right.
2 live at gmail.com.
I'll put a little border on the bottom of this.
Yeah, we'll get that in
Cool.
here.
That would
So
be great. I appreciate that.
yeah. So speaking of Stump the Chump, one of the things we want to do before we get into this discussion of the U.S. Army at Pearl Harbor is to also thank our Nerdarati and do a little cleanup from a previous episode that we did a few weeks ago, where we were pinning medals on the chests of people on board the USS Trout, and
Yes.
Seth and I were speculating on who it was that was doing the pinning, and we were wrong.
Yes, indeed. We were
Yes.
very wrong. It
Yes.
was De Los Emmons that was doing the pinning, and it was the context was right. It was after the Trout's the gold run, as
Yeah.
it's called, and they are Army medals. You see the Distinguished Service Cross on there, and it's pretty evident. But yeah, we were trying to figure out who the hell the gentleman pinning the medals on was, and we
Right.
were dead wrong. And the Nerdarati came through yet again, and was De Los Emmons. But the thing was, with that episode, what I thought was awesome is we even asked. There was a Phantom destroyer in some of the footage we
Yes.
were looking at, and we couldn't figure it out. I could not.
Yeah.
I don't claim to know every ship that I see, and we couldn't figure it out for anything. And we even asked on the episode, "Hey, Nerdarati, help us out, man!" And the Nerdarati came through, and it's a Porter class, Porter, Porter
Mhm.
class destroyer. And it seems to be the consensus thinks that it might be USS Balch, Balch,
Okay.
which was riding
So we'll
with
get
that
a little
task force at the
little
time.
clip of that up again, to show
Yeah,
the
yeah.
footage we're talking about. But yeah, as always, like we say, it takes a village. So thank you, village,
Thank
for
you, Nerdarati.
chiming in. Okay, so on to
Yeah,
the fun
let's get to it.
for today. And this episode actually was kind of a quick draw, in that after sitting in the living room with you last week, John, I was like, huh, when Seth and I did this series of episodes on Pearl Harbor, we never really got into the Army experience on that, and you sort of castigated me, and rightly so. And so I
Yeah.
just like, because what you said was, did you read my book?
Did you read my freaking book, dude?
Here's the book.
I said it as imperiously as possible. Did you read
Absolutely.
my book? Very
Yes.
academic down to, yeah.
So in any case, if anybody's interested, this is the volume in question, Fire and Fortitude, which is the first in John's trilogy on the U.S. Army in the Pacific. But yeah, we just thought we wanted to have a little conversation today and round out the Pearl Harbor experience, having bombed the airfields and bombed the anchorage and all that stuff. Let's talk about the Army. So just off the bat, how many Army personnel do we have in the Hawaiian Islands at this point in time?
Yeah, so there's basically two understrength divisions, the 24th and 25th. There had been the Hawaiian division. Now it's a little bit more of a modern structure of what we come to associate with a triangular division and all that. So the 24th and 25th are in the process of getting up to speed and up to strength when Pearl Harbor happens. And so you got that. And then you have this vestige of the old Army, the Coast Artillery units. That have been there a long time. Have been a kind of a bedrock of Oahu's defense and the island's
Both
defense.
Shafter and
Yeah, exactly. And also down closer to the mouth of the harbor, some of the tiny little forts there. This had been there a long time, and it had been a big part of the American kind of defense mentality dating back pretty deep into the 19th century. So you add that, you add the whole medical apparatus, assorted engineers and signal and commo people, radar technicians. I think it's somewhere north of 70K. I mean, and they're not all on Oahu, but you've got a pretty sizable force, in other words, and they have some level of modern artillery. Not quite what we're going to have, but there's a lot of 105s, and then obviously there's the coast artillery guns that are heavier, and the infantry are starting to get armed with the M1 Garand and Thompson submachine guns, all those things that we associate with later in the war. So I think it's a reasonably potent force that also has to, of course, work with the Army Air Corps, as it was at that point in time. It's going to be called the Air Forces, obviously, after the onset of the war, but So you have a lot of air assets too that are
Sure.
concentrated at Hickam and Wheeler and all these
Wheeler.
various places.
Right. So there had been a Hawaiian division, and I'm assuming that is a old style square division. Is that right?
I
Four
think
four
so. I think,
regiments, and then
yeah, but
they
under strength, very
right,
much under strength. Yeah.
and then they probably like chopped it in half, and one half becomes 24th, the other half becomes 25th, and you've got two under strength regiments in those divisions, and that's what we're sort of building from at this front.
That's
Is
what
that
we're building from. You've got
okay?
the 19th and 21st Infantry that are part of the 24th Division. You're going to have the 34th, obviously, that's it's going to round out the division. The 27th is really the core of the 25th Division, the 27th Infantry Regiment, which is the Wolfhounds, which of course still exists.
Right.
So they are really like the core of that division. But yes, it's going to be rounded up to be a triangular three regiment division. It's the 161st that gets kind of sent in as the add-on in
Right.
addition to the 27th and 35th. Boy, speaking of nerdery, I mean, here, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Here
You
we
get
go.
me going on this. Yeah.
Right.
So that's basically the structure as they're building it.
Got it. Okay.
John, let me ask you this. When you think John, other John, and I did all these Pearl Harbor episodes, and we were talking about the Navy, the pre-war Navy, and the personnel in there. They, by and large, most of those sailors hated Oahu. They did not like it. They were away from their families, they were away from everything. What was life like on Oahu for a United States Army soldier? It was a bit different because a lot of these cats, these are dudes that had been in the Army for a long time.
Time.
I mean, like 10, 20 years, and they're enlisted men still. So what was life like on Oahu for a U.S. Army soldier in 1940, 41?
Yeah, I think the Army soldiers tended to like Oahu a lot better. It's sort of like Philippines light on some level. I mean, the Philippines would have been the most desirable posting in that, pre-war era.
Right.
Oahu was reasonably well liked because you had Honolulu right there. You had all sorts of bars and nightclubs. There was a lot to do in that sense. But
Hmm.
I think, the novel From Here to Eternity and the
Yeah.
movie. James Jones captured it so well. The culture of that
Mhm.
army, it's really an kind of an army that has a foot in yesteryear, even as it's beginning to modernize. So what I mean by that, it's a very unequal army. Of course, it's completely segregated and it's pretty much all white.
Yeah.
And its officers are very, very remote figures for the average soldier. NCOs ruled like lords. Sometimes squad leaders are these like local tyrants in a platoon, and the lieutenant is hardly even there. So the enlisted and officers did not really mix. There's a constant competition for wooing the few white women who are in the neighborhood, and that tends to be officers and more senior NCOs who use their power unreservedly and have a lot of social advantages that other people don't. But most of the Army life centered around sports.
Hmm.
This was a big part of the pre-war Army anyway, overall. But I think especially on Oahu because that was like the center of what there is to do. And
Yeah.
and so if you were an athlete, regardless of your rank, you really had a better go as a soldier. And what I mean is like almost everybody would get up around Reveille, and you had three squares, which was very attractive to people in the
Sure.
Great Depression to be part of
Yep.
Yeah.
this. So you'd have your breakfast, you'd do your morning drills, and so then a lot of that is weapons calls and that kind of thing. Sometimes there'd be, field maneuvers and hikes and whatnot, and then the unit would have lunch, and then the athletes would usually get excused to go practice or play a game of some sort, and then everybody else would have to go back to the soldiering bit.
Right. Cleaning
So
out trash cans and yeah, policing up the
exactly,
barracks and right, doing all
leasing
that
up
stuff.
cigarette butts and all, yeah,
Right.
KP and all the unfun stuff that fell on the privates. And so there was a little bit of a class system there too, and who was an athlete and who was not. And then
Right.
officers very much knew that a lot of their careers would depend on whether they had good sports teams in their units. So I know
Mhm.
it's crazy to
This
think
is
of
kind of
this.
wacky. Yeah.
So that's why they would really prioritize this, and they'd even try and get ringers and poach people and whatnot. So you have that going on, and then the other thing too. This is so yesteryear. If you were a new soldier, if you were a recruit, you're not going through basic training first and then getting assigned to this unit. You go out to the Hawaiian Division, as it was called, or the 24th and 25th, and that's where you do your basic training, like
Oh,
in your assignment. So that's very, very different than what we're going to have, of course, once the war, it really was starting up already, but especially once the war begins and ever since, where you go to basic first. And then eventually, you're going to get assigned to a unit based on your MOS or whatever. But yeah, so so I think Jones really captures that kind of culture and spirit and inequality of the moment.
yeah,
It's pretty interesting stuff, though, I think.
yeah. So during the actual attack, I loved I loved this line from your book that the Japanese strike on Pearl Harbor targeted American air power and sea power. The ground soldiers just happened to be in the way.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's true.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they wanted the fleet, really. I mean, they wanted to
Right.
destroy the fleet. They wanted to destroy whatever aircraft they could. And yeah, those of us on the ground side of the equation are just really in the way there, and so
Yes.
become kind of targets of opportunity or in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
You have a few soldiers who are sleeping aboard ships, who have been drinking with their Navy buddies or whatever, and sleeping off hangovers here and there. But obviously,
Yeah.
most of the ground soldiers are at Schofield Barracks, which is, of course, northwest of Fort Shafter, and that's where a lot of the 25th Division is based. And then, of
Still is
course,
based.
yeah, still
Yeah.
today, and it's so interesting because some things haven't really changed much. I mean, the
Yeah.
the quadrangle is still there.
Hmm.
Fort Shafter is very, very similar to what it was back then. It's
Yep.
this beautiful rustic post, and so yeah, I mean, so obviously, they're after Wheeler Field, which is right next door to Schofield. They're after Hickam, which is obviously manned by a lot of Army personnel and Coast Artillery people nearby. So yeah, I mean, the Army guys are really just in the way. It's the
Yeah.
Navy, as you guys know better than I. It's the Navy that really gets hit the worst.
Yeah.
So,
Although obviously Wheeler and Hickam get plastered. So
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna say, so one of the big images in our mind is something that John and I destroyed pretty much, no pun intended, was that when the Japanese do come in on the air raid, the Americans are sitting there picking their nose, and that's not the case, because AAA goes up almost instantaneously around the harbor and everywhere else. I mean, it's pretty quick. What is the reaction like at Schofield and Fort Shafter during the attack? Because they do get strafers coming through there and
Mhm.
different things are going down. I mean, they're not just, waving them, hey, I mean, what is the reaction of the dog faces down there at Schofield when the defecation hits the ventilation? What goes on?
Yeah, you have these moments of confusion where, like, for instance, Jones remembered very
Hmm.
clearly being at breakfast that morning, and then they hear these booms going on,
Sure.
and so one of the guys eating with him said, "Is somebody doing some blasting?" And then they're like, "Well, no, I don't think so." And then they rush out of the mess hall and grab whatever weapons they can. It's kind of the same thing in Schofield Barracks. There's a bit of confusion in the moment, figuring out what's going on. There was one NCO, this grizzled NCO, who was saying, "Yeah, those are just Marines doing maneuvers
Right.
up there in those planes," and and they're like, "I
Yeah.
don't think so, Sarge." And so
Yeah. Yeah,
so
he actually said that the Marines camouflage their planes to look like Japanese
yeah,
planes. It's like,
exactly. It's like,
mm,
yeah, wrong call on that one, Sarge. I don't think
yeah,
so. So
yeah,
yeah, they're just in that case, they're just grabbing whatever infantry weapons they can. You got guys
yeah.
shooting with Browning automatic rifles with 30 calibers. There's several guys who get burns because they're shooting the water cooled 30 caliber machine gun, and they don't have any
AK-17.
place to situate it, and they're trying to point it upward, and that kind of gets you into resting it against your wrist. And of course, you guys know, I mean, that's not a good
Yeah, that's
option. And
no.
so yeah, there's people who get burns because of that, and of course there's strafing in the quadrangle, there's bombing there, and of course Wheeler Field is getting, like you said,
Sure.
plastered, and
Plastered.
so
Yeah.
so that's part of it too. One of the most interesting accounts is from Aubrey Newman, who was intel officer of the 24th Division at that point, and is going to end up being a regimental commander and eventually retire as a two-star general many years later. One of the things that's interesting about him is he will mentor many other infantry officers. And so you see that kind of mentoring tree from Newman to this day, honestly.
Mm,
So Newman, is, basically reading the Sunday papers, and then he hears this booming going on, and runs out there and figures out what's going on, and is in the course of the day gathering all sorts of information that he possibly can just to figure out the nature of this attack. So that's from like a ground perspective.
Yeah.
And then, of course, too, preparing for the possibility of Japanese airborne or amphibious operations and that kind of thing, too. So you have that happening. And then closer to Pearl Harbor, of course, you got the Coast Artillery people who are in the middle of very, very heavy fighting with their organic guns that they're firing back the best they possibly can, and doing some pretty intense fighting. And then they're coming under direct attack at times. I think at times the Japanese are even expending ordnance bombs, to take out some of those guns because, what do the Japanese lose? 25 planes, something like that, in the course of the day. That's
29. Yeah.
29. I mean, that's a pretty significant bite in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, so some of that is coming from that Coast Artillery anti-aircraft fire or whatever, but you also then have the kind of absurd situation of people firing rifles at the planes and that kind of thing too.
Right.
Yeah, taking pot
I've
shots at
never really
1911.
understood how much in the way of heavy AA, from 3-inch on up, the Army actually had on the island. And this is one of those stump the chump kind of things. Do you have any notion around that?
It's a mix. So yeah, you've got the 3-inch on up. You've got organic machine guns. I think 50 cals. I think.
Mhm.
Right.
You've got your 30 cals and all this kind of stuff too. But really, the Coast Artillery people were designed to shoot after an enemy fleet.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, so it's the heavier guns that really aren't necessarily going to do that much for you against those planes. But at the same time, those Coast Artillery units were reasonably well armed. And so
Yes. I'm
this is
assuming
their
that's
big.
mostly lighter automatics, though, right? Because
Yes, I think so.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so they've got some weapons, and it's a matter of figuring out what's going on. And then, of course, got the whole drama around the ammo lockers and all that. Because in
Yeah.
peacetime, all that is heavily supervised, and only an NCO or an officer. And you guys know those stories where people basically shoot the locks off or whatever, or argue about whether we can get into the lockers and all that. But by and large,
Yeah.
like Seth said, they're not just sitting around. They get after it as quickly as they can, and they shoot as much as they can. There was one guy who said. He was so enraged, he would have attacked him with his fists or his,
Yeah, I would have bit the plane if I could have. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's a sense of helplessness too, I think, from some guys.
Yeah. Yeah,
What
I
what
did. I was just gonna say I did enjoy the little quip of the one supply clerk who was like, "Okay, you can have the ammo, but I have to have receipts for this."
typical. That is typical.
Love that.
I work on an army post. That is typical of anything that goes on. You get a 10-penny nail. I need a receipt for that. Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
right.
So
Thank
army, isn't it? Yep.
Oh God, yeah. So what type did it's true though. Was
Yeah.
there any success to the ground fire? I mean, I know they clipped at least a couple
Hmm.
Japanese aircraft, one of which like plows into a tree or something like that, and the prop
I
winds
think
up
that's the
taking out what,
Schofield,
three
isn't
or
it?
four guys, isn't it?
I think that was a Wheeler. That
Was
one,
Okay.
it?
I could be wrong, but yeah, the prop comes off and it just flies through and plows through a bunch of guys,
Oh, jeez.
and just it wreaks terrible damage. The pilot's body was intact though. They found that, and of course there at Wheeler. A lot of guys are eating breakfast when the
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
attack happens,
Negative.
and one guy gets wounded. I think even killed by the shards from a mayonnaise jar, and so there's just crazy stuff like that goes on. But so yes, I think that in some cases you've got machine gunners that do take down some planes. Not very many, of course, but
Sure.
Yeah.
it does happen. And so for the soldiers in terms of fighting back, they're just doing the best they can in that regard. Some of them are taking crazy chances, I think, to fire rifles at these guys when they really ought to be taking cover.
Yeah.
Because they're getting strafed, and that's
Yeah.
a pretty dangerous situation. I mean, you guys have been there and seen it. I'm sure you've seen the
Mhm.
bullet holes that are still there at Hickam, and
Yeah.
um, I mean, it's just really a
Yeah. It's,
kind of a crazy circumstance.
yeah. That's a whole thing. Yeah. The accounts of Japanese Vals even coming down low to do their strafing too, because they had some.
Multiple times.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and
Um.
also it's interesting too, like how many of these soldiers observe the Japanese aviators and see their
Yeah,
faces, like you guys, like we were
right.
seeing each other, and in some cases the Japanese waving at them and smiling and all this kind of stuff. It's very human in that regard compared to a lot of air raids, very personal. And I don't know enough about the naval side to know whether that was common, but it at least is common enough for many of the soldiers that they have that kind of personal experience of some of the Japanese aviators. And they comment too on the special bandanas they're
The
Right.
wearing.
Hachimakis, yeah.
Hachimaki and yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah, I've gone back and forth on those accounts. It, it is difficult for me to believe that we're going to have that clear a look at a Japanese plane that is whipping by at 200 plus miles per hour. But on the other hand, these sorts of accounts are also endemic. You see them
Hmm.
from a lot of different people and from a lot of different places. So I tend to think that they certainly could see Japanese faces. Whether or not the saucy, I will now flick my
Yeah.
kerchief at you or whatever. That kind of stuff I don't buy, but I do think you're right that yeah, they're close enough that it does have an element of being very up close and personal for them. I don't know.
It would make perfect sense too. If it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen over an army installation because kind of to our point we were saying earlier, when the attack goes down, the Navy, immediately the fire goes up, and not belittling the Army to any degree, but to your point, John, they didn't have a lot of heavy AAA, and all they're shooting back with is O3s and
50s and
BARs.
30s and
So they're
yeah,
going to have more of an opportunity to go back and
Yeah.
forth. I mean, we talked about vowels and zeros coming back and making five, six, seven passes
yeah,
Oh
down the
yeah.
line. So it makes
yeah,
Yeah, they're
sense.
straight. So I think it's possible. Yeah, I mean, there's no question they describe the facial features of
Sure.
some people they see and whatnot. It certainly made an impression on them. And some people felt they were almost close enough to touch the planes. Of course, they weren't, but it
yeah,
must have felt like that, I guess.
right. Yeah, when you're
Well, they
under the
say
wings that way.
fear
Mhm.
magnifies objects 10 times.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
For sure.
seriously.
So then once the attack gets over, of course, now you've got a number of sort of unless is there other stuff about the attack that we want to get into? I'm pretty much
I
through
think
this.
the medical side is really,
Yes,
I think, on some level, the biggest thing to explore from the Army's point of view.
right.
That's where you really do see pretty extensive involvement.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I was really interested to read in your book was the fact that there's this visiting surgeon at Tripler, a guy named John Moorhead,
Red.
doctor, who was a big shot apparently, and was coming in to do a series of seminars at Tripler that had drawn, in some cases, upwards of 300 physicians who were, sitting in on this guy's talk. And then when he's still there when the attack goes down and immediately, charges back into the hospital and seems to be fairly instrumental in organizing triaging and that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, we benefited incredibly by having this enormous Army hospital right next to Pearl Harbor that had a very large medical staff. And of course, you've got a lot of doctors that are just practicing around the island too, that also end up participating in some of this, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, anybody who could, it was all hands on deck. And there was a brand new Army like little medical station right near Pearl Harbor too. That was
Mm-hmm.
manned with female nurses as well. And this was a kind of sleepy new place. At that point, all of a sudden, it becomes just this mass casualty collection point.
Right.
You have that, and like you said, Tripler is instrumental in this whole thing. Moorhead, like you said, John, just happens to be visiting, and that was really quite fortuitous. Who knows how many lives he saved? He had seen a lot of combat in World War One as a
Right.
combat surgeon, and so what he's literally there to do on December 7, 1941, why he's in Oahu, is to basically brief both civilian and military doctors as to how to deal with combat trauma surgery.
Hmm.
Exactly, what was going to be useful at this moment. He'd given a lecture on Friday. And of course, he was convening to give a lecture on Sunday when all of a sudden all this is happening. And
War happens. Yeah.
yeah, and so he and these other folks, who have been listening to him, are in a position to save. I mean, who knows how many people, but
Dozens. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And so they react very, very quickly. And even while he's operating, he operates, I think, for like 12, 13 straight hours, something like that.
Mm.
And then yeah, I know, and he finds out from the Army medical commander, well, while you've done this, we brought you back to active duty with a full colonel's rank. So welcome
You're
back.
in the Army now, bud.
You're in the Army. That's his reward. So even then,
Reward. Yeah, right. Yeah.
wouldn't you just love that? But I was struck by in researching this for the book. I was very struck by how much preparation the medical authorities had done during the months leading up to this.
Yeah.
If we weren't necessarily prepared for the attack on the operational level, which clearly we weren't, we were more so on the medical level, that they had a really good medical infrastructure ready and waiting that I think is a difference maker
Yeah.
when this comes about.
Right. Yeah, I was struck by a number of the accounts there. The fact that one of the surgical theaters that normally held only 3 beds, they crammed 7
Mhm.
into operating tables and were basically going rock around the clock 24/7 on all 7 of those tables, just until the doctors basically kind of fell over, just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Constant. It's just this constant conveyor belt of casualties coming in. It's obviously all services. It's some civilians.
yeah.
The difference I think that I noticed, at least on the medical side, is that almost all the burns were Navy.
Mm,
Because of the flash
Makes sense.
burns and
Yeah.
obviously
yeah.
the burning ships and whatnot. So if you were a burn victim, it was likely you were not a soldier. There were a few exceptions, but so mainly on the soldier side, you're talking about some level of bullet wounds here and there, but
Shrapnel
mainly like
things.
blast wounds, fragmentation
Right.
wounds, to flying debris, concussion, ripped
Chunks of
limbs.
road, macadam as
Yeah.
they called it, right? So you get asphalt blown up into your torso someplace, and yeah, that can also do pretty nasty stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
The,
Some of
and
the
these are
Go ahead.
young people. In many cases, they're really, really young guys, 17, 18, 19 years old. And of course, too, I mean, it's the physicians are doing the actual surgery, but they're aided by nurses who are doing a lot of the prep work, who are doing the assist work. Most of the nurses are women
Yeah,
from the Army Nurse Corps. And I mean, you talk about getting an introduction to war.
Mhm.
yeah,
They're under fire. Truly, they are under fire, but they're also dealing with, I mean, my gosh, seeing all of these young men, especially now in a really a terrible wound trauma situation, in
yeah,
the case of
All
many
at
of them,
once. Yeah.
all at once in this mass thing like a tidal wave, and then the guys who are not as badly wounded are really going to take on a role of like orderly and organizer and helper and whatnot, as they don't just sit around. In many cases,
yeah,
they help the medical personnel. And I think that really stands to the credit of them as well. And then everybody else who could is helping the way they can with rolling bandages. I think aside of the Pearl Harbor attack, we tend to forget is that some of the military families are in the middle of this too. And
Mhm.
right.
and I think that's more so for the Army than the Navy. So that's part of the advantage of being a soldier. I think in some cases, if you were an officer, maybe an NCO, you may be living with your family there at Schofield Barracks or whatever. And so
Right.
some of these folks are actually some of the military wives and whatnot are going to be in the hospitals helping roll bandages, get
Yeah.
medicine, get meals for people, organize, move people around. I mean, all that stuff is going on,
Right.
and local ladies of the night, shall we say,
I
too.
was amused by that as well. That yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of them showed up as well and were rolling bandages and thank
Mhm.
you, thank you very much.
Yep,
So yeah. Um,
that helped a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Well,
the civilian population, actually, I'm reading another book right now, called Nimitz at Ease, which is talking about his friendship with a family on the island called the
Yeah.
Walkers. And
Mhm.
Mrs. Walker was instrumental in lining up, bandage wrappers. And she and her core of women volunteers manufactured, I can't remember the number, but it was just absurd, 500,000 sterile bandages or something like that. So yeah, to your point that there was already a fair amount of organization in the civilian and the military medical infrastructure on that island, yeah, it had to have saved lives. Had to have.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to ask you, because this will lead into another portion of what we want to talk about. What is your opinion? I have my opinion. I know John has his opinion of Walter Short.
Had to
Be-
get into it. Yeah,
yeah, because his and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but his opinion of the local population informs a lot of what happens the night of and the day after. But what is your opinion of Walter Short as a Army commander?
Walter Short really views the biggest threat to his personnel and his installations as coming from the locals,
right.
as a local threat. And I think maybe if we're being as objective as we can in evaluating him, you have to understand something the demographic makeup of Oahu, that whites are a real minority. They're the dominant minority, of course, but most people trace some sort of Polynesian or Asian heritage, and among the Asians, most were Japanese in
Yeah,
lineage, and I think that's over half the population according to the 1940 census.
it's at
So
least 40%. Yeah, something like that. Yep, it's a
it's
lot.
a pretty high number, and so Short believes, as is the case ultimately with the American government in Executive Order 9066, that if you're of Japanese heritage, well, then you're a suspect, and you can't
Yeah,
necessarily be a loyal American somehow, even though, of course, many of the folks on Oahu of Japanese lineage were U.S. citizens. So Short is a sort of example of the kind of military, or the cultural and ethnic and racial prejudices of the time. We know he's 100% wrong, really. I mean, that there isn't much threat coming from the local population. Of course, all this plays out famously in the way he has the aircraft collected out, where they
yeah,
make great targets rather than in revetments or in hangars where they would have been a bit better protected. Where we see it play out, not quite as much damage, but possibly more tragically, is in tension with the locals in the wake of the attack.
right.
And so there are a number of instances where it was
Shocking,
possible,
really. Yeah,
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 that was quite possible that the military personnel could have opened fire on locals, or rounded them up or whatever. There are all these rumors flying around among the population that the army was basically taking people out and executing them, or that they were just executing the men, or all this kind of
yeah,
stuff. Crazy, crazy business. So I don't necessarily think very highly of Short as a commander. I don't think that he has enough commitment to having combat air patrol over the area, and collecting his aircraft as they should. But of course, too, he's a kind of person of his time in that sense too. I don't think he's necessarily one of the great innovators in the army.
No.
And he's working reasonably well with Kimmel, but Admiral Kimmel, the commander in chief of the Pacific Fleet, but not anywhere near well enough. So certainly, my opinion of Short is not high.
yeah,
I don't know how
yeah.
you guys feel.
No, we're pretty much right there with you. I think
Yeah.
that one of our big hang up points is that there was not enough initiative on the part of either Short or Kimmel to really establish joint communications
Right.
between their two organizations, that hey, if you get a report of something spooky, fishy happening, you know you need to tell the guys in the other services to what the heck is going on. We have no joint operations room here. Even if Kermit Tyler had been a little more aggressive in his questioning of what it was that his two privates were seeing up there at Opana, he had no real ability to get
Couldn't do
anybody in the
anything.
Navy on the horn and say we got a problem here. So
And that's a big issue.
yeah,
Absolutely a big issue. Yeah, because I mean, it's a whole comedy of errors that happens with that, with the radar station and Tyler.
yeah,
If he hadn't had a conversation with a B-17 pilot about
Right.
what the planes would be coming in,
sure,
if the private had told him exactly how many blips he saw on his scope, then maybe that would have gotten Tyler's attention. But even then, with that whole weird situation, the Navy has no idea this is going on. And I
yeah,
think they probably should have known.
yeah,
Let's
Yeah.
tell them. Let's tell them what's up. I mean, even if we're
Yeah.
even if we think don't worry about it or whatever, the famous phrase, Tyler, and I think he's taken
yeah,
too many lumps for that, in my opinion. But
Oh yeah. Totally.
I mean, this is a guy who is just thrown into this duty. He's not really trained for it. He's a fighter pilot, and
right,
he's best he can. But I think the Navy should have known that that incident happened.
Yeah.
And the Army should have known that the USS Ward had sunk a submarine too, and
Yes.
that would have been of some import to everybody, right? So,
Yep.
Short and Kimmel do not do a good enough job of that coordination, I think.
That's what we said. They play golf regularly, and that
Mhm.
seemingly is where all conversation of any type of communication, inter-service communication, stops on the links, and
Yeah.
it doesn't
Started and ended.
go. Yeah, it doesn't.
Beyond
It
the
doesn't
18th
exist
hole.
past that
Yeah.
at all. And it's again, what would have happened? Who knows? But I mean, it's just dies on the vine right there. When they get in the car and they go home after the last hole and have a beer, it's over, and it never
Right.
seems to pick up anywhere else. So,
I
Yep.
was going to ask, talk about the milk truck rumors.
oh good Lord, yeah.
Just
Here's one of the many bizarre rumors that day,
yeah,
and there was a rumor that the Japanese have this Japanese manned milk truck again, like the local kind of insurgency angle
yeah,
here.
right.
That
Fifth
the
column,
locals have
fifth
been
column.
waiting for this, and they're finally going to attack. And I personally, this is only my opinion. I think part of that is like this sort of white guilt over the obvious reality that this is a kind of imperial place and
Right.
dominated by Paolis, right? So they're always a little worried about whether the population is going to push back against that. And I think this whole milk truck thing is maybe just a manifestation of that. Well, the idea is that they've infiltrated that onto Hickam, I think, and that it's actually it looks like a milk truck, but they're hidden machine guns. And then they put down the barrier or whatever. They open up with the machine guns on the runways and on the soldiers there, and then that's inflicting a ton of casualties.
Right. And of course, yeah, just absolute
Total,
nonsense.
yeah,
Malarkey. Yeah.
total
I had
nonsense.
I had heard, I didn't see this in your book. I wanted to ask you about it because I have visited Schofield and the little museum that they've got there, the 25th ID, which is really cool, I think.
Mhm.
But I and one of these tours, I remember hearing that there were at least some militia members on Oahu that were of Japanese American extraction. And then after the attack goes down, they start reporting for duty and whatnot and are instead disarmed. Uh,
Mhm.
is do you have any further information behind that?
As I understand it, that is true. They're initially disarmed and told, not only are you not going to serve with us, we are going to keep you under observation, and we're going to basically treat you as spies, at least initially.
Right. Yeah.
Eventually, of course, once the furor calms down, then obviously their National Guard units come back into
Yeah.
play, the 100th Battalion and all that. But they're not anywhere near treated as equals, of course. Yeah, as I understand it, that is actually true. That
Yeah.
there were, guys in local units who I think were part of like the National Guard entity, I think,
Right.
Sure. That makes
which
sense.
which would have been the 100th Battalion probably, but I couldn't swear to that. And yeah, they get a pretty hostile reception from the Tropic Lightning initially because
Yeah.
everything and everyone Japanese is suspect at that point.
Right.
It's even there's another incident where I was talking about the military families. Of course, they're having to evacuate their homes in the course of the day, and
Wanted to
that's
ask
a whole
about that.
thing
Yeah.
too. Yeah, and
Right.
so you have a Chinese American soldier who comes to the door, and this family is like, "Oh my God, the Japanese are here!" They just see an Asian face, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And they're all panicked and freaked out, and they wouldn't let the guy into their house, and he had to basically shout the instructions from outside. And I always wonder how that guy felt.
Yeah.
Like, man, here I am serving as an American in the army, and this is how I'm treated, and
I'm
and
from
trying to
Houston,
probably
man.
just
Come on.
Yeah.
he's
Right.
probably trying to tell everybody to listen. I'm Chinese. They're our
Yeah.
allies.
Yeah. Right.
I'm not Japanese. But yeah, I mean, there's stuff like that happening. It's just the confusion of the moment.
Right.
Oh,
And that
goodness.
evacuation goes on all day and all night. And it sounds like very classic army and that hurry up and wait, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're supposed to rush out of your house with nothing, including I don't even have enough formula for my newborn, and now you're putting me on a bus and you take me to someplace in Schofield, and now I have to sit here for a day and a half with nothing. Is that
Yep.
kind of what went down?
That's a lot of what goes down because you have that initial attack. Because remember, too, a lot of the families are under the attack in a way,
Sure.
near Schofield and whatnot,
Their
and
own
so
post.
they've
Yeah.
seen the planes and heard some of the bombing and whatever. And fortunately, I don't know of any fatalities among them. Maybe there were some, but I don't think so. But yeah, I mean, it's this total hurry up and wait thing. You got to convene at such and such place, and then obviously it's tough to organize this evacuation because they don't know what's going to happen next. Of course, they don't know if
Right.
this is just prelude to a bigger operation or whatever. So generally, they're going to get on buses that take them into Honolulu. Well, you can imagine how bad the traffic is. It's bad at any time,
I
right?
was gonna say
But
it's bad
during
now. Yeah.
this. Yeah, exactly. During this, it's kind of a cluster, and so fortunately, you have um, the Red Cross involved. And here again is where the preparation comes into play. The Red Cross is pretty well prepared to care for these folks. And so you're going to have meals and, clothing. Believe it or not, people needed blankets because it was going to be chilly at night or whatever. And
Right.
so they're pretty well cared for in in this short run, but a lot of them end up convening in I think the schools in Honolulu, some of them, of course, fritter off to go help on the medical side too. But
Sure.
you have, it's kind of amazing because you have in some cases officers who really aren't that physically far away from their spouses, and yet they're totally out of contact and they don't know
Hmm.
what's going on with each other, and they're very worried about
Sure.
whether so and so is hurt or dead on both sides, not just
Sure.
a wife worrying about a husband who's a soldier, but the other way too. So there's a lot
Hmm.
of a lot of trauma associated with that, with not necessarily knowing whether your family's okay.
Yeah. And of course, yeah, that night is just a
Mm.
dumpster
Hair on
fire.
fire.
Yeah,
Every
Right.
time.
everybody's just flipping out that yeah, the Japanese are landing in gliders and they've been reported here and there's, invasion troops there and
Everywhere. Oh my
yeah,
God.
Japanese
All these.
paratroopers wearing blue coveralls and all this malarkey, and
yeah,
mechanics are
Yep.
stripping their blue coveralls, going, "I got to get out of this damn thing." So,
Exactly. Yeah, there's all these reports of paratroopers coming in, and
mhm,
it's just crazy. And so Colonel Newman, whom I mentioned earlier, who was the intel officer of the 24th Division at that time, eventually he's going to be the commander of the 34th Infantry later in the war. But Colonel Newman is digesting a lot of these reports, and he's like, "This just doesn't add up. Like, where would they be
right.
based? How would they have gotten here? Where were the planes? And how would
yeah,
they?"
right,
And so he personally investigates one report of an airborne drop, and he finds out that it's a kite in a tree. So that's the level of hysteria because they don't know
hysteria,
it. I think maybe we can relate to this because we all remember 9/11 very well.
sure,
So there's this mentality of like, oh my God, if they can do this, what else can they
What
do?
else?
What else
Yeah.
could be next or what's going on? I don't know about you
hmm
guys. I heard so many crazy rumors that day.
Mhm.
And so this is the same thing. I mean, they're wondering what else can the Japanese do if they pull this off?
yeah.
So yeah, it's a really really crazy night.
Related 911 story. I was actually supposed to fly on that day. I was going to go out to the Naval Academy to go to a symposium that was out there. Tony Tully was coming out there with me too. And I have a really good friend who just retired from the history department there. In fact, he's our mutual friend, Ernie Tucker, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I called up Ernie that night and he was like, let me tell you, the Naval Academy right now is the last place on earth you would want to be because you've got all these twitchy Marines with M16s wandering around here wondering what's going to happen next. And it's the same thing on Oahu the night after Pearl Harbor. Everybody's just flipping out. And so you have a
Yeah.
lot of instances of, as you put in the book, somebody would be like kind of nervous on, is my gun still, ready to go? And I'll squeeze off a few rounds
Mhm.
from my machine gun just to make sure. And everybody else, oh my God, here come the
They
planes.
just fire.
You know,
Yep. Yeah. Let's get after them. We're not going to get surprised again.
right.
Yeah. And there's one guy who is basically on post on his guard all night because he keeps firing at his relief, So here's the guy come to relieve him and he thinks
You're
it's a
right.
Japanese soldier or something, and he fires at him, and then finally they're just like, all right, you're staying out there all night. And
Yeah.
one of the Coast Artillery majors, a guy named Steve Callis, who had been in some pretty decent fighting during the day. So he had seen the Japanese planes come in and all that. So because I think he was at a fort near Hickam, and
Yeah.
he said the most frightened he was actually during the night
Oh,
when you have all this going on, and he was going to have to move from point A to point B and risk getting shot up by his own side.
Hmm.
So I think that's an eye opener. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, that'd be more
Yeah.
frightening because he's actually in more danger from that, weirdly, than the Japanese planes.
Right.
And that's a fun. I don't want to call it a phenomenon, but that's a phenomenon you see almost inherently with the Army on Oahu after the attack. Not to say that the Navy doesn't shoot the aircraft down, because we know they do, but you know the battleship Pennsylvania is not going to be boarded by Japanese. But there is the legitimate at that time thought that the Japanese might follow up this air attack with an invasion. And I mean that's almost solidly Army. So that's why you get these cockeyed stories, because these guys are out there to theoretically defend the island. So, which is going to lead to the question I wanted to ask you, John, is after all this goes down and all the hair on fire, they do deploy units out to
Just
the
going to
air.
ask about that. Yeah. How does that all work? I mean, are they sending out, have they already had pre-designated defensive sectors that, okay, 24th, you cover these beaches, 25th, you got these? What, give us the skinny.
Yep, they've got coastal defense sectors that they've already created. They've actually built pillboxes prior to this, and that's a whole thing too on the sociological side. That while this construction was going on, there were also a lot of local girls there too, and the soldiers were hooking up local girls in like the pillboxes that they had built and whatnot. And so
Classic.
it is classic. Again, it's so army in a way, but so a lot of these guys had very pleasant memories and association
I
with
bet they did.
these defensive installations. But now, what
Oh
we're
my
so
God.
this affects the 24th more than the 25th. The 25th is still kind of recovering from the strafing at Wheeler and Schofield and all that, and they're kind of manning that area. Not that they're not involved in the coastal defense, but if you're a 24th Division infantryman, the likelihood is you're going to be trucked somewhere in the course of the day down to that southern coast, because that's where we expect the invasion, along the beaches and the southern coast. That's where the defenses have been built. The Walkers, who you mentioned earlier, I think lived on the northern coast, if I
Northern
remember
side.
correctly. And
Yeah, they're close
yeah,
to
so
Kaneohe.
yeah, exactly. And so, so there isn't as much attention focused there. It's mainly on southern Oahu, and so they're basically hunkering down in these positions in the course of the night and expecting an invasion at any moment. So if the three of us are privates in a squad, for all we know, the Japanese are going to invade
Sure.
maybe at dawn on December 8th, and we're alive to that possibility, and we're hunkered down in some of these positions we might have helped build within the few weeks leading up to this. So it's
Yeah.
kind of odd. But yeah, I mean, we're on full alert, of course, full alert. So these are rifle companies also with heavy weapons like 81 millimeter mortars and the water cooled machine guns, backed up by the artillery, and obviously that's the real wallop. And
Yeah.
we actually have at least one fire mission in the course of the night for the artillery, and so
Really?
there are reports of submarines off the coast, and the
Okay.
submarines have, quote, swimmers coming out of them. In other words, these must be commandos of some sort who are going to come in
Right.
and raid. So we have a fire mission come out there against these so-called submarines, and of course the swimmers are dispersing and all. They're like, oh my gosh, that's Japanese coming to the beach. Well,
Right.
actually, it
Whales.
was a
Yeah.
school of porpoises.
Right.
And you can understand why the porpoises would be a little disturbed by all these shells coming in
Yeah.
in their
It's time
midst.
to disperse now.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly. So not the
Let us
best night for
disperse.
them, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, crazy. Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, the
So,
other thing too is the Army, I think, is most affected by the other rumor that sweeps through in that day, and this comes again from the kind of short mentality that the real danger is the population, that the Japanese Americans had poisoned all the water supply on Oahu.
right.
So you got a lot of thirsty people in the course of the day being told, sorry, can't drink that water. That guy, Major Callis, who I mentioned earlier, he's got Coast Artillery guys who have fought their guts out in the course of the day, and they are thirsty as can be, and yet
Yeah.
they can't drink any water. I mean, they can, but they think it's poisoned. And so, if we are these, privates hunkered down in the course of the night, whatever we brought with us in our canteens is all we can drink. The
Yep.
rest of the water is going to be off limits to us until we sort this nonsense out.
Right. Oh man.
Well,
I
that
know.
that That brings us to
Bummer.
the question I think people want to hear, and we were talking about this very, very briefly before we were recorded. We know, of course, it doesn't happen, and the Japanese didn't plan for it as part of the attack, but
And we should talk about why they didn't plan
for
for it as
sure,
part of the attack.
for
Yep.
sure, but an invasion
Yeah.
of Oahu. Let's talk on this for a minute. How, I mean, you said, ballparkish 70,000 United States Army personnel in the Hawaiian Islands, the majority of which are going to be on Oahu. I mean, the Japanese would have stood a pretty damn, it would have been a tough nut to crack to get into Oahu and take the island.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
my my
I
odds
don't
are
mean,
heavily
I don't think it
against.
happens. There's no way.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. They just don't have enough amphibious lift. I mean, if they pulled all the stops out, they've got about maybe 2 divisions worth of lift. And so there's all sorts of problems with it. And I'm sort of going back before. Here's why the Japanese would never have done that. The primary purpose of this war is to secure the raw materials in the southern resource
Sure.
area. That is the focus
Oahu
of this.
doesn't have that.
Thank you. And so if you only have, call it roughly 2 divisions worth of lift to play with, the primary operations that you got to get rolling at the outset of this thing are Malaya, number one, and then into the Philippines, number two. So if you read the Senshi Sosho volumes, and fortunately a couple of them have just been recently translated that talk about the planning for this operation, the Japanese are just playing the shell game. Like the transports that they use to bring their initial echelon down to Malaya, then turn around and go back up to Hainan and Formosa to load troops that they're going to take over to the Philippines. This whole thing is this intricate clockwork organization where they're having to, shuffle ships around just to move the troops around that they were moving. There's no way in hell that they're going to say, okay, yeah, we're going to take all of that amphibious lift and we're going to
Go
use
all
it
the way to
against
Oahu.
Oahu. The other thing that I would point out is that it's one thing to bring in a carrier raiding force and position it north of the island. It does its overnight run at high speed. We're talking 24 knots, I think, 22 to 24 all night long to get into position to launch. You go do your thing, and then, you recover aircraft and you boogie on out of there. It's quite another to take
Can't
a
do that with
group of,
transports.
6 to 8 knot transports, and you're going to run them into the maw of this enemy air envelope over the course of a day and a half or 2 days in order to be in a position to then land troops. And you think that GHQ was a little bit, a little nervous about risking that raiding force. Tell me what they're going to think about the notion of actually doing an actual invasion against Oahu. There's no way that was going down in Tokyo.
Right.
But, okay, so having said all of the naysayer stuff, now what happens? Yeah, what happens if they show up and manage to put 30, let's call it 30,000 troops on the island? Do they win?
Well, the other thing that's in play I'd add is that there's 3 American carriers out there too who could savage that landing fleet and some of those transports. So let's say they're in play in addition to the land-based air that we've salvaged right there. That's going to leave quite a bite. And if we're thinking about the broader war too, John, I'd say that if they can land those 2 divisions, it's been at the expense of all these other amphibious operations that they're actually doing. They were lucky to land a regiment at any given time, in various spots. But let's say somehow they can get those 2 divisions of 30,000 guys ashore. I think they're really looking at a tough fight, in part because of those coastal defenses, but it's mainly the artillery backing it up. And then that kind of infrastructure we've got of coastal guns and coast artillery, and maybe something of a layered defense. Then you've got Honolulu right next door as a potential urban battlefield too. I mean, to me, that would just be a debacle for the Japanese. They weren't very good at amphibious invasions when they had any kind of firm opposition. Corregidor is a really good example of that. I would give you, and those
Wake Island.
Wake Island, another one exactly, and that's an even better example, I think. But Corregidor, these are half-starved guys who inflict serious damage on the Japanese there. But
Okay, so
Oahu,
I'm going to be devil's advocate here. I'm going to play the Japanese side. I'm not coming into the southern part of the island. I'm going to land in the north.
in
and I'm gonna,
December
yeah.
with those big old waves.
Woo!
I
You're
just,
gonna have some
you
landing
know,
problems. You're
yeah,
gonna
no,
lose a
okay,
lot of people on those
that
rocks.
yeah, that is true. The North Shore is not super conducive for landings.
It is not.
It
Good
is
for
not.
But
surfing, but that's it.
maybe they have rangers trained for that, and they can come up like the rangers at Point de Hoc, and
Yeah.
because they can do
Okay.
anything
So
now.
never mind. Okay, so we're gonna have to land in the south.
You have to.
Um,
Yeah.
I would note though that at I think it's Kota Baru in Malaya, the Japanese fifth. Okay, so now I get to trot out what I know about the Japanese army. If we're gonna take the divisions that we would have used elsewhere, I'm going to use the same divisions that I would have used in 25th Army, because the Japanese fifth, which is a square division, I should mention, is a really old good unit, and they are the oldest unit in the Imperial Army that had amphibious training. These guys know what they're doing, and they fought ashore on the Craw Isthmus, and they, brushed back a British brigade that was there. That gave them a very stiff fight, but they prevailed. So I think there's at least some credible evidence that you can make that that division in particular has the ability to get ashore against a bunch of scared, nervous American servicemen that were not expecting a fight of this nature. The Japanese are outnumbered all the way through the Malayan campaign, and they just absolutely shellac the British during that campaign. We're not in much better shape in terms of morale, I would say, than the British are in the aftermath of this enormous hammer blow that's just been landed on us. Do we do any better than the British do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, no, I think we definitely do better because, yeah, okay, we've got our morale problems. We were stunned and all this, but we're really pissed off and thrilled, thrilled to wax as many Japanese as possible when here they are in front of us. I don't think there would have been any trouble getting those soldiers to fight. Or I think it differs from the army in Malaya. This is a cohesive, a much more cohesive army. I mean, that army in Malaya is an imperial army with people in the British
Indeed.
Empire who may or may want to fight for England or whatever, and so they're not treated as equals. Whereas you have in the U.S. Army, I mean, here is a kind of cohesive force that now sees that it has an objective and something to defend. I think we're probably going to do better, but your point about the Fifth Division is a really good one. That's an excellent unit, and they're going to do
Yeah.
some damage. I mean,
Yeah.
so maybe they're going to get ashore, but I think they're also going to have a hell of a time once they do get ashore. I mean, I think their supply situation is probably going to be pretty tenuous
Yeah.
given whatever naval resources we have left and the carriers out there and
Well,
whatever air assets can come into play.
and
Yeah.
that brings me to 2 points. One, you said that the guys in Malaya, the British in Malaya, are imperial troops. The guy, mostly the infantry in Hawaii and Oahu in 1941, as I said before, these are professional soldiers.
Yes.
There's
Right.
a few draftees here and there for sure, absolutely, but more than three-quarters are guys who'd been
Well,
in for a long time. These dudes
there's
knew what the hell
there's
they were doing.
yeah. I'm just trotting out nuance
Sure,
for the British Army in Malaya here, in that you do have some longer service battalions,
sure,
but yeah,
yeah.
like 11th Indian Division, you're right, has got two or three longer service white battalions, and then mixed in with the Punjabs, and they got some Gurkhas and that kind of
The
thing.
Gurkhas are bad dudes, yeah, but
The
still,
Gurkhas are
Hmm.
bad dudes. They got absolutely steamrolled by 5th Division's reconnaissance battalion, mostly because they were on lorries at the time that they were attacked. But in any case, it, but one of the points that comes out of the Battle of Jitra is that, sorry, the white battalions don't do any better than the other
true.
battalions in 11th Indian either. They get steamrolled by 5th Division. Anywho, I think your point is basically correct, though, that by and large, those are longer service troops. It's sort of the army equivalent of the old breed, right? You've got these sort of
Kind of. I
long,
mean,
Even older breed.
even
yeah,
older breed.
some of them are very old, and yeah, like Seth said, I mean, these are professional soldiers, many of them, or new volunteers too. There's also that.
Hmm.
It's a mix of people, but this is like something of the professional core of the army that's there. And I think that there would have been a significant amount of fighting know-how. Maybe if we have some kind of point of comparison, though, it's how U.S. forces perform in the Philippines, and that is an
Right.
imperial army. And I
Yep.
think they acquit themselves really quite well tactically against
I
the
would agree.
Japanese. It's the logistical situation that compromises them. So if we don't have a logistical problem, which obviously we're not going to on Oahu, I think it stands to reason that in addition to the sort of enraged nature of this military force post Pearl Harbor attack, I think they're probably going to fight pretty well. And I just don't think that invasion would work out well for the Japanese, even tactically. But I mean, if we're looking broader, trying to supply and sustain that kind
Oh
of
yeah, forget it.
far-flung
Yeah.
operation, all that would have been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then too, you got the naval forces that are coming in the following day. You know, Halsey's bringing Enterprise and all that jazz inside the following, what, evening?
Well, of course, Kita Butai is still out there too.
For sure. For
You
sure.
know, let's
Mhm.
not discount that. I mean, I don't want to go up against Kita Butai, even with
No,
three
no.
carriers.
Which, yeah,
Granted, they have about
not
I
them.
believe 111 damaged aircraft. They've lost 29. It's unclear as to how many of those 111 that were damaged are actually salvageable. We know that their fuel situation is probably kind of tenuous, but you know they certainly have the ability potentially to pivot, re-oil, come back down and support a landing force in some respect. Although they weren't a power projection force in the sense that we would look at the U.S. Navy in 1944 being able to basically park offshore
Right.
of an island bastion and you just beat it into submission. Kita Butai could never do that, but if you're Halsey, you got to be cognizant of the fact that there's a large enemy carrier force somewhere, and that could be very, very bad news if I run into it.
And
Yeah.
I wonder if U.S. submarine forces would have come into play against
Mm.
them, and if that could have been an element too that would have, inflicted some damage or at least limited what the Japanese could have done.
That
I don't
actually
know how
brings up
many
well, I was just, yeah, I don't know how many subs
yeah
were in
are
Pearl
in.
at that time, but it wasn't insignificant. And you're right that we still have a lot of lighter combatants that are
Yeah.
left in the mix at this point.
That are
So,
out doing
yeah,
their thing. St. Louis
Yeah,
and several
St. Louis and
destroyers
a lot
and
of the
yeah.
other cruisers, right?
hmm
Yeah.
And that's what I meant about the naval force, about Halsey coming in. If there was a landing force off of Waikiki, let's just say,
Hmm.
Halsey's got his cruisers screen, he's got his destroyer screen, and then of course he's got Enterprise and her air group or what's left of it, because of course they lose a few aircraft here and there.
Yeah.
I think they're going to tear that up, off the coast of
Yeah.
the Royal Hawaiian. They're gonna eat it up. So
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I
Interesting
think
conversation.
probably.
I think we're all fairly skeptical of yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Of
And
Japanese
it's of course,
success. Yeah.
as
yeah. Odds.
historians chewing this over 80 some odd years later,
For
we
sure.
know all the various elements and
That
dimensions
they
of
did
it.
not.
In the moment, they
Oh
don't
yeah.
know. I mean, the average
Yeah.
civilian in Honolulu doesn't know all these, permutations and like, oh my gosh, the Japanese are coming next. I never expected they were going to hit us by air, so they
And
must
that's the
hit us
key.
by land now,
And that is precisely the key. What you just said is because we didn't know their abilities. We damn sure didn't know their abilities because we had no idea
Mhm.
that they were capable of doing what they just did. So if they could do that, then they for certain can put people on Waikiki.
Right.
That's the thinking.
So
Yeah.
Exactly.
thereabouts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
and since they really wouldn't be capable of doing this completely themselves, they must be getting treacherous help from somebody locally. That's part of the equation too. There's even
Right.
one situation where you had a fighter pilot watching one of the attacking planes and really admiring the enemy
This,
pilot,
yeah.
his acumen, and saying that must be a German pilot, in order
Yeah.
to
Right.
pull that off.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's a little tinge of racism in this whole thing too, I think.
For sure. Yeah.
Which brings up another dimension. I mean, if the Japanese had actually landed on the island, I think that has very bad consequences potentially for the civilian population there. That,
Yes. I
some of
agree.
these incidents that, managed not, that calmer heads prevailed. As you say in your book, there was one incident where, a patrol of American soldiers comes across a group of Hawaiian civilians and like, we should just shoot them now. And finally, it's a private. It's like, no, we're not beasts. We don't do that kind of stuff. But you can just one little inclination the other way, and you've got 5 or 6 dead civilians there. I think if the Japanese actually land, you would have had incidents like that.
Oh,
I'm
I think
just,
so.
yeah,
Yeah, I
For
agree.
sure. I think so too.
yeah, a lot of innocent lives being lost. So
Yeah.
don't want
Glad
that.
that didn't happen. So as bad as it was, at least that didn't happen.
Right, right. Another point of errata that we screwed up on last time, Seth, the actual number of civilians killed during the attack was 68.
Yes.
68. Okay.
All by
60,
friendly fire too.
all by friendly fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a 35
Anti-aircraft
more
fire.
wounded. Right. What goes up must come down.
That is
Yep.
true.
So,
Horrible.
yeah.
Horrible. And that's a byproduct of this happening very close to a big metropolitan area, of course.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
of course, these folks not expecting anything like this, and it's Sunday, and
Right.
it all adds up to those 68 dead.
Right. Yeah. Bad. Anything else we want to get into? I thought this was
This is
fun.
cool. This is
Yeah,
fun.
we've covered our bases now. We can go and I can go to sleep tonight and sleep soundly knowing that I've not pissed John McManus off and by
See,
not
that's
covering the
always
Army. Yeah,
always a good thing. My wrath is just absolutely
oh,
terrible, and
it's
it's
terrible.
My wrath.
The wrath of
I
McManus.
mean, go forth and sin no more.
Right.
Remember,
Okay.
remember that the army is involved, and that we're a part of this too, kind of thing. But no, I think one little interesting wrinkle of this going forward is that the 25th Division, and the 24th too, but the 25th gets into it sooner. They feel like they have an axe to grind against the
Sure.
Japanese after this, and
Believe
of
it.
course they didn't get hit badly like the Navy did, like the USS Arizona and all that, obviously. But still, it was a point of honor for them. And so
Right.
I think that's a player at Guadalcanal once
Mhm.
they're on the ground in Guadalcanal in December 1942. Not that they're enthusiastic, but I think they're quite resolved to fight. And
Right.
I think that the fighting around Mount Austin and the Galloping Horse and all of those
G4,
famous
yeah.
capstone battles, I think that the 25th certainly is really
Motive.
looking to yeah, motivated to eliminate the Japanese. And they have an outstanding commander by that point too, in General Collins, Lawton Collins. Um, and that gives more agency to it and more aggressiveness to it. The 24th has to cool its heels much longer time.
Sure.
It's gonna be about 2 years almost before they can 2 years plus before they get into combat. But both of them would have had that kind of muscle memory of being on the
Hmm.
wrong end of this attack. And I
Right.
think that's kind of interesting going forward. So there's sort of the kernel of a kind of avenging army that's going to come into play by the time the war starts to grow and get bigger.
Yeah. Well, I think, when we get to some of the episodes with the Philippines, I would definitely be interested
Oh, heck
in,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah,
because,
there's so much to chew over there. Yeah,
oh
so
my God, yes. Yeah.
the Philippines campaigns are enormous. I mean, they're
Yeah.
almost analogous with Europe on some levels in terms of the combat power involved with some of the battles in Europe. I'm saying.
Well,
Um,
I'm thinking early war. I'm thinking the
42.
oh, that
42.
too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that too. But also too, that's the other interesting thing from a kind of sociocultural perspective. That army that fights in the Philippines is unique in American history in that it's basically an imperial army in the British model.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting to examine that whole thing and to chew over what that means and how they fight and how that impacts things, how it impacts the POW experience. I mean, you name it.
Cool.
The
Yeah.
Philippines is it's there's a lot of fodder for us there. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Outstanding. Well, John, one more time, your podcast. Where is it? Where
Yeah.
can we find it? What's the name? All that stuff.
Yeah, so it's called World War II Live, and it's co-hosted by Kevin Hemel and yours truly. You'll find it on YouTube. So just search World War II Live with my name and or Kevin's, and you'll find it like that. We've only dropped 2 episodes at this point, so it's brand new. We're just kind of looking to have fun with it and hopefully build an audience, get the word out. We really appreciate you mentioning it today, just to get an
Absolutely.
audience because we think it's a blast and we think you
It is
guys will
fun.
like it.
It's a blast.
So and it's also on all the audio platforms, most notably Spotify and Apple. And we're gaining more platforms by the day, actually. So that just takes time.
Cool.
Yeah, it's called World
Yes,
War
it
II
does.
Live. If you want to send us questions for Stump the Chump, it's World War II Live at gmail.com. And it's a numeral two, the Arabic numeral two.
Cool.
All right. Well, cool. Are we good?
I'm good.
All right, we're good. All right, so let's wrap it. So with that, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Give us a rating and review. Check out John McManus's podcast. I'll put I know, too many damn Johns. We had John Bruning in here, and then we got a whole freaking
Yeah.
pack of Johns. But I'll put the ribbon at the bottom here. Go to John's YouTube channel and click subscribe and give this stuff a check out. You will not be disappointed,
Sure.
guaranteed. So once again, my name is Seth Paridon. I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. John McManus, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me. It was a blast. Thanks.
Cool. All right, John.
And
Parshall.
I'm John Parshall, the other John. And thanks everybody again for tuning in, and we will see you again next week.